Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Enlightening Your Way. I'm your host, Nancy Lombardo. We are airing live tonight on the Lilydale Assembly official Facebook page and YouTube channel. I am a year-round resident in Lilydale and the president of the Church of Living Spirit, which is an independent spiritualist church here in Lilydale. I'm a military veteran, retired police detective, fitness and yoga instructor, and wellness is my passion. This show is a combination of my many life experiences that will feature various topics and guests to help enrich one's mind, body, and soul on your pathway to healthy living. My Facebook page, Wellness with Nancy Lombardo, where my motto is protecting and serving your well-being. And today, my special guest is Scott Allan. Scott's life has been about connection. First as a caring funeral director, and now as a renowned evidential medium, author, and mentor, who is known to many as the Boston Medium. Scott's autobiography, In the Presence of Light, A Funeral Director's Journey from Mourning to Mediumship, is now available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and Balboa Press. Scott is the host of his own podcast show called The Enlightened Life podcast and has been featured on other podcasts to include The Forbes Factor, Psychics on the Scene, A World Awakening, and We Don't Die Radio. Scott shares his gifts regularly on Spirit Talk Radio via Pulse Talk Radio in the UK, and he is honored to share messages of love and peace and hope to those in need. And for everything else about Scott, you can find out everything about him at mediumscottallan.com. That makes it easy, doesn't it? Hi, Scott.
Hi, how are you, Nancy? So nice to meet you again.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here this evening.
Thanks for asking me. My pleasure.
Of course, I'm so excited that your book came out just in time for this show, so we can tell everybody your premiere book. And I have to tell you, first of all, I love the title of your book. It was very clever using the word mourning, because I immediately thought mourning, that play on the word. It was clever. It was clever.
Yeah.
But before we get into it, I want to talk a little bit about you and let people understand and know a little bit about you. So your funeral business, was it generational?
Not at all. No, in fact, I started working at the funeral home when I was 16 years old. I was mowing lawns and washing cars and that kind of thing. And I never really thought early on that this was where I would go because I didn't have anybody in the family that did it. We had family friends, and I would deliver to the funeral home. My grandparents had a flower shop, and I would go with my grandfather all the time. And I think maybe that's where the spark kind of hit me because they were close family friends. But, I started working in there when I was 16. And by the time I got out of high school, I was ready to go to school. And I was in it for 35 years.
What kind of job does a 16-year-old do at a funeral home?
Mow lawn, wash cars, polish the brass.
So you were outside of the funeral home, not inside.
I was inside too, but not doing, not doing funeral things. I did work calling hours. I worked awakes from time to time. If I was there on a weekend, I might work a funeral with them, something like that. But other than that, it was mainly like maintenance and that kind of thing. So I got a little older.
What captured your interest to actually start working inside the funeral home?
Well, it gets cold outside, so you have to go in occasionally. I'm in New England, but honestly, it really. When you say work inside, it doesn't mean you're in the room where they're doing all the embalming. I was inside because that's just it was the building. You go to work every day, and that's where you go in. So that never really bothered me. Although it did feel, I have to be honest, it felt a little strange. There were some moments early on where I thought to myself, "My God, what am I doing?" Like, what am I getting myself into? It was just foreign. But after a while, you kind of get used to it and you realize that, you're helping people generally and you just get accustomed to the idea of being around it. It made it a little easier.
I know we were chatting, not tonight, but a week or so ago when I contacted you, and we were talking about me being a police officer and crime scenes and everything else. And of course, the funeral director people would show up there because they're the ones that take the bodies away. And there's a little bit of a correlation of police and funeral directors and the jobs we would do. So I understand that when I say working inside, that it's not just inside, it's the whole the whole thing of it, the
Right.
whole thing of it. And it's
Right.
a good thing. I was I read that excerpt from your book that you sent me where you stated that there was a general lack of emotions and called it the business of death. And that when you went home and you left the job, it was simply continued life. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah. And that was when I was a little boy. So I was probably 8 or 10 years old at the time when I would go delivering with my grandfather. My grandfather and grandmother owned a flower shop for decades. And I would take and go with my grandfather and deliver flowers all over the place. But they had a big business in funeral flowers. And so we would go into the funeral homes. And a lot of times the the person who was going to be waked was already set up, and we would go right into the room and leave the flowers. And it kind of creeped me out a little bit. I'm not going to lie. It was a little creepy. And one day we went in there, and the owners were arranging someone in the casket. They were setting up flowers. They were kind of fixing his suit and pulling him up on the pillow. And I remember being completely transfixed on that, thinking all I kept feeling was this man has passed away, and why am I feeling these emotions? And it wasn't that I was crying, but it was like, oh my God, his wife's coming in, his children are coming in, whoever they were, and they're never going to see him again. This is it. And I had all of these emotions coming to me about him. Meanwhile, they're talking about the New England Patriots and what's going on with their kids in school and what they did on the weekend. And it was almost like these two worlds kind of existed at the very same time. And I remember thinking, how come I feel like this and they pay it no attention? And I asked my grandfather when we left, how can anybody do that job? And he said, yeah, it's kind of gruesome. But that's not what I meant. I meant, like, how can they turn off those emotions and just continue on as if nothing happened? It was like death held no sway over the daily routine. And so there was a part of me, and in the book, I talk about this a little bit. I think that was a little bit of the spark, really, at the time that made me feel, rightfully or wrongfully so, uh, that I cared more than they did. I don't think that's necessarily accurate, but I think in my very young brain, that's the way I felt, and I thought I can do it better because I care more. And as I look back at this, like now I'm almost 60. So you look back at these days and you think, okay, all of this was part of it because most people probably wouldn't have felt like I felt. I think that was the empathic part that was just sort of starting to bubble to the surface a little bit. And I go into it in more detail in the book, but what I can do this, I should do this because I know that I care more than they do. And I know that's not accurate, but they did you know what it's like. You were a police officer, right? You can't take all of this stuff home with you every night. And when I got into the funeral business myself, I didn't bring it home with me every night. You just can't.
Well, I don't think you bring it home with you, but I think it bubbles up. It's there, you can try to suppress it all day long
Yeah,
and say you're not taking it home, but it bubbles
yeah,
up. And the fact
it
that
does.
you do care, you got to care. And the funeral directors, I mean, I watched them all the time. They care deeply for people because they come in with such grief.
Right.
So you have to be able to show that empathy for them for sure. So
Right, but you can't care for people if you're crying with them. You have to be able to set that barrier up, between yourself and the emotion. And I think that's really the lesson that I needed to learn because at 8 years old, you can't be aware of that.
I like the way you worded that for sure. You have to be the strength of that for sure,
For sure.
with
For
showing
sure.
empathy.
Yeah.
Was there any death or funeral arrangement that particularly was difficult for you that you can think of?
Outside of my own family, I'm assuming being people that I worked with, there were a few. I dealt with some horrible stuff over the years, and I think the worst ones were always children. And even worse than the children were the ones that were violent. We
Yeah.
there was a while that, at least for the city of Boston, they did not have a crew way back in the day that would go and get people. They would work with funeral homes. They would call a funeral home and say, "We have a death wherever." So I've been on a lot of scenes of homicides and suicides and accidents, and there have been some that have just left you really shaken, to be honest.
Yeah, those sudden deaths are very difficult for everybody all the way
Yeah.
around. And I can understand that for sure. From all your years as a funeral director, would you say 35 years?
Yeah, all of that. Yeah.
That's a lot. What have you learned about grief?
That it's a journey, not an event, and that everybody deals with it differently. The path to healing is different. That road, not everybody takes the same road. And so what might be right for one is not right for all. And, somebody, it might be 6 months, someone, it might be 6 years, and you can't judge it. Everybody's different. And I think that's the biggest thing is we just have to take it the way we get it.
I love that. That's
Yeah.
that's a great explanation for that. So, do you not believe that many funeral directors or people working in that line of work that they all felt things from the dead that they were dealing with?
I mean, so run that by me again, that they all felt things, or they,
Yeah, like
you
felt
mean
things. Probably
emotionally, you
not
mean?
call it. No, 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 no. I mean, mediumship or just.
Oh God, no. I mean, I don't know anybody else. And that ended
Really?
up like me. I think they'd have ran me out of town if I told them what was really going on. Oh my God, yeah. I
But they
was in a
sense things.
small little town.
Well, I wasn't into mediumship or anything like that when I was a police officer either, but I can promise you a couple times when I told you we had alarm calls in funeral homes, and I would go in there and I would definitely feel a sense of I couldn't tell you what it was, but I would feel a sense of something. I would feel something. I don't know what I would identify it as.
Yeah.
And I think people maybe that aren't in tune with it, maybe they're feeling it, they just don't know what it is or recognize it.
That's possible. That's possible. But you have to understand when you're in the funeral business, it's like running for office every day of your life as long as you still work in the business. I mean, you are held to a different standard. You are in a fishbowl. You don't talk to dead people, you join the Lions Club. I mean, that's kind of how it was. It did I built a funeral home from the ground up in 1998. And that funeral home was, we took over an abandoned lot that evidently 100 years before there used to be an old Victorian mansion, and it had burned down. And when they were doing the groundwork, they found um, pots and pans and druggist bottles, and back from like 1900, a long time ago. And I started to notice shortly after we moved in that I could hear people walking around. I could feel them coming up and down the stairs. Sometimes I'd hear them, sometimes I'd hear my name called. And I thought, oh my God, this place is haunted. I can't believe this, that I built this brand new funeral home and the funeral home is haunted. But nobody else really got it. I had a secretary there and she never heard anything. She never quite got it. And I
Mhm.
stopped trying to convince her that there was something because I thought she'd quit. If she if she thought the place was really haunted, I don't think she would have stayed. So, it was kind of funny. I think that for me, I noticed things. I'd love to go back and talk to the man who bought it from me and
Mhm.
ask if they've ever noticed anything.
Right.
But my sense is, I mean, and you know what it's like, right? Even mediumship, it's so subtle and nuanced that if you're not stopping to pay attention, you might miss it. If your head's in 50 other directions, you're not going to be sitting there thinking, "Oh, I must be a medium." You're going to chalk it up to coincidence, whatever it might be, or you might not even notice it.
Correct. Yeah, I totally agree with that for
Yeah.
sure. As I've said that with police officers too, many of them are psychics. They don't call it psychics. They
Mhm.
say intuition. They say hair raising up on your arms. They don't.
Yeah.
They would never call themselves that. So yeah, I agree with that.
And I think that's why I didn't notice it right away because I thought this is not what it looked like. I did not think this is what it would look like to me.
Right. Yeah, that
Yeah.
makes sense. So, what perspective have you gained in life from working with the dead?
I think it gives you a better appreciation for the finality and the finality of this life and how short this life is. Even when you know in your heart and you believe it with everything you have that there is something beyond this life, even to us, it's still a mystery. I feel like we're like tuning into a radio station where you get just a little blip of what really is the true existence. And so you have to make the best of what time you have here and really do what you can to help people and enjoy your life because it is over in the blink of an eye. It really is.
It literally is over in the blink of an eye, for sure.
Yeah.
So when did you first discover that you could communicate with spirit?
Well, as I said, things had started to happen even when I was in the funeral home, but I wasn't communicating with anybody. I didn't know what it was. I was just noticing things.
Like what were you
So
noticing?
like I could hear them walking around, or sometimes I'd hear my name called. It was that kind of
Mhm.
thing. It started to happen back probably around 1998, 1999. I started to notice things, but really didn't chalk it up to anything significant. I had got out of the business and I moved back here, and I had a friend of the family who lived in this area where I am now, north of Boston. And she called me up one day. She says, "Well, now that you're local, I'm going to this historical museum. It used to be a church rectory that they tore the church down many, many years before, and they sold the rectory off to the town, and the town has a museum there. I'm going. Would you like to go?" And I said, "Yeah, well, what are you going to do?" She says, "Well, actually, we're going to see, they've got some exhibits." She said, "But they say the place is haunted, and I want to see." I said, "Oh, I don't know about that. I don't know if I'm not really, I'm not really into ghost hunting. I've never even, like I said, you join the Lions Club, you don't go ghost hunting either." So I thought, I'll go with you. I'll go with you. So we went, and there was only like four or five of us, and we were kind of looking at different things. And somebody had a recorder, and they said, "Do you know anybody's name here?" Well, and of course, nothing, nothing. There was nothing, absolutely nothing. And I thought, "Oh, it's like, that's sort of boring, you know." And I went home, but I had recorded it on my cell phone, or my or whatever I had. Must have been my cell phone at the time. And I recorded it, and I went to was going to go to bed, and I played it back to listen, and you could hear about 10 or 12 of them calling my name.
Hmm.
Scott, Scott, Scott. And I put it on my YouTube channel, by the way, Spirit Talk Live with Scott Allan, because it was so mind numbing. And I called my friend up. I said, "Listen to this." I said, "Did you ever hear that before?" And she said, "No, that's a little creepy." She says, "I don't like that." She says, "I've had them say my name once. I've never heard that before." So that was sort of the very, very first thing where I felt like somebody knows my name. And then after that, I started getting, anytime I would turn on a recorder, I would hear from a spirit named David.
Hmm.
And David was always asking for me, always, always, always. And after months and months and months, I was terrified. I didn't know what to do. I thought, I went with her to this one place, and all of a sudden now I've got a spirit attachment. This is what, in my head, I'm thinking this, right? So I had met this woman who was a medium, and I reached out to her and I said, "Look, something's wrong. I don't understand this." She's the one that told me what was going on, and I still didn't believe it. It
Did,
took me a long time to grasp it.
did you say it was a David?
David. Yeah.
Did you know a David in spirit, or a friend, or
No, I
somebody
didn't.
else?
I had never met David. In fact, I had a friend that was at work one day, and this guy came into her work and asked for me. And she said I wasn't there. And she said, "Well, I'll leave him a message." And he said, "Okay, tell him David stopped by." And it was It was, I would say, almost every single day there was another David story,
Hmm.
and people I know that were on like doing a Facebook Live, such as this. Sometimes I'd hear it come through the recording. I started to think I'm losing my mind, is what I was thinking. It was so common, but I found people that would help me, but I didn't even believe that they could help me. I didn't know. I really didn't believe it. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what the problem was. And I did find out who David is later on, which is a very interesting story. I don't know if I should tell you because it's in the book,
Oh,
but
oh,
I will tell you.
don't give all the secrets of the book.
No, yeah, I'll keep it as a secret. But I did find out something about David that was really unique. And I'll tell you just a brief thing. I have a next door neighbor that I have been parking next to for years. And one day my mother called me and she said, "Hey, I went to the senior center today, and there was a medium there, and she was great." I said, "Oh, did you get read?" And she said, "No, I'd never been. I wasn't, but it was still really interesting." So I get home, and this neighbor of mine is getting out of her car, and we start talking. I said, "Laura, how you been?" She said, "Oh, I'm good." She said, "I just come back from the senior center." I said, "Oh, did you go see the medium?" She says, "No, I am the medium." I'm like, "Wait a minute. My next door neighbor's a medium all this time, and I never knew it." So we ended up having coffee, and
Oh, that's cool.
she's the one who told me who David was. She pulled him right out. She goes, "Who's David?" She said, "Who's this David that's around you?" I went, "Oh my God, what is
David's
going
everywhere.
on?" It was all the time. Yeah, it was all the time. And now it's not. I mean, I think once you face the music and say, okay, I get it and I'm here. What do you want? They stopped it. It was just, they needed to get my attention.
So, did this change your idea of what dead actually meant?
I think I always believed in something beyond this life, but there's death that's the physical death for sure. I mean, I lost my mom a couple years ago, and I mean, it's still hard. It doesn't matter,
Oh,
but
always good. Yes.
when you feel like you can communicate with and get information from those who have crossed, it changes things dynamically. I mean, it just is a totally different. It's not just a matter of faith at that point. I mean, faith is great if you believe it without that, but when you are able to communicate and provide information to people that can help them, I mean, that's a whole different thing. So I don't know if it changed what I believe, but I think it definitely gave me a little more certainty that what I was believing was real.
I know a couple of your bios, and you've used the word haunting before. Has it changed your idea? You don't consider these hauntings and using that kind of terminology, and rather embracing, because as spiritualists, we don't really believe in bad spirits and bad entities like that.
Right.
They're people in need and souls in need.
Right. And when we talk about haunting, I don't necessarily think that's bad either. I don't think they're bad. I just think they're not maybe where they need to be, perhaps for whatever reason. I don't know. I mean, again, I don't have the answer. It's not something that is as a regular part of my life. I mean, I don't really go ghost hunting. I mean, I did it a few times, but it's really not. You know what I mean? It's not even. I don't have time for it. So that's not really a big part of what I do. Uh, but I think at the time I was really trying to find an answer. I thought somebody is going to be able to tell me what's happening to me. And it
Mhm.
started when I was at the funeral home. It started with this, why do I feel like there's someone standing next to me? Why do I feel like I know it's a man or a woman? I don't even know why I know that. I must be, that can't be real. Or I would hear them walking up the stairs and that kind of thing. I don't know what that was. I don't even know if the funeral home was haunted or if it was just them starting to, maybe I was just becoming more aware. I have no idea.
Yeah,
I
I'm
have no
sure.
idea because it didn't really come to me until after I got out in any great way.
So, what inspired you to write this book?
I started out just making notes because as things were happening, people were saying, you should write this stuff down because there's a lot of things happening to you that you won't remember everything. I mean, it'd be good just to write it. So I would start writing every time something happened, anytime David would show up or there was some kind of a weird thing. And I have to tell you, he would show up everywhere. He'd show up in my car at the coffee shop. He would show up. I was with my cousin one day working and I'm hearing my voice being called. So it isn't just about, haunted places. This was anywhere and everywhere, including my house.
But
So I started writing it.
did you
What's
find
that?
it to be one of your spirit guides?
But definitely David is a spirit guide. There's no question. There's no question, but it's a little bit deeper than that.
Okay.
So yeah, it's he is a little more special than that, I think. But he's still around. It just doesn't come to me the way he used to come to me. But I always ask him for help when I'm doing a reading or whatever I'm doing. He's around. Once I had this notebook of just notes, I said, maybe I should start like connecting the dots and making it a little more fluid. And then I started writing and I got through a whole bunch of it. And I said, well, wait a minute. Let's separate into areas like, well, this happened first, this happened second, almost like chapters, but they weren't chapters yet. And then they became chapters. And then I thought, well, what am I going to put next? What am I going to put after that? And so I just kept going and going and going. So it was years before I finally finished it.
You
But
said
it's
four
only
years.
166 pages. Yeah, give or take, because I didn't do it nonstop, but it wasn't starting out to be really a book. It was just my
Was it
notes.
a way that you were healing? Do you feel like you found healing out of it?
I think it gave me validation because, sometimes, at least for me, imposter syndrome is real. And I felt sometimes that this, did I really experience that? Did that really happen? Even sometimes I'll do a reading and I'll think, Where the heck did that come from? How did I get that? I don't even remember what it was that came to me that made me understand. And so by having these notes, I was able to understand that, yes, it seems like, yeah, it was 4 years ago, but this really happened because here it is. And this was the date, and I wrote it down, and that's what happened. I think it just helped me believe it a little bit more. And now I
Trust.
love seeing it. It's trust. And isn't that everything,
Yeah, it's
really?
everything. Every teacher, every good teacher teaches that you got to trust. It's not a matter of did it really happen. You trust that it happened and know
Trust.
that it happened for sure. So
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Without it, I can't do anything. The trust
no,
is everything.
100%, 100%.
Yeah, yeah.
So, do you find mediumship more rewarding than being a funeral director?
It's so funny. I would say it is in a way. And it's the same people. It's
Mhm. Yeah.
exactly the same people. I had served the living because of the dead, and now I serve those who have crossed over because of the living. And it's just the focus is different. That's all. But I think that I can do this without all the other stuff. People call and make an appointment with me for a number of reasons. It could be because they're looking to make a connection. Sometimes that I don't know. I think some people it's just they're curious or whatever it might be. Nobody ever called me at the funeral home and said, "Can't wait to see you." It just never worked that way. So I think it's rewarding in the sense that I can do this and still help the same people, but it doesn't have that negativity associated with it.
Yeah, but honestly, I think being a funeral director is such an important job also, and I'm sure you did a
Totally.
great job at it because
Yeah,
I said you're there at someone's vulnerable state, most vulnerable state.
absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
I don't think it's denoted as a bad part to be in. It's an important part. It's an important part of the transition of understanding the the death cycle. And yeah, I think it was, I'm honored or I'm grateful that you did it for so many years for so many people because
And
it's,
I was all in. I mean, I loved it. I loved the people I worked with. I loved helping people. I was on the board of directors of the Mass Funeral Directors Association. But life changes, and I'm doing this. And to me, it's different. It's not the same thing, but I really feel like it is just equally as rewarding in many, many ways.
so how do you feel your mediumship has changed you as a person?
I think it's brought me back full circle
Mhm.
because I was always meant to serve. And I think my job in the funeral home was training for this, but yet it's still the same people. So I was always meant to be doing what I'm doing. And there was that period in between where I stopped, where I wasn't doing this, either mediumship or funeral directing. This has kind of brought me back in a little bit.
Yeah, it does definitely.
And
Listening to you, it sounds like your life has gone full circle for sure.
full circle. Yeah. Yeah. And I love it. And I love the people. And I'm grateful that I get to do this.
Before the deal with your grandfather, did you have any incidents younger than that, younger in life?
Not that I can recall. I just think that was the first, I was about 8 years old. So that was the first recollection. Although I tell this story because I think it has some kind of significance. And my grandmother used to tell a story about herself when she was a little girl. And I think the mediumship may have come from her, although my grandmother was very, very, very Catholic. Never mentioned it, never called herself a psychic, although she had a godmother who was very much a medium, and she would talk about her. And so I know she was a believer. When my grandmother was a little girl, it was a very cold winter night, and her parents made her sleep in the same room with her brother to kind of conserve heat and keep warm. And they were playing checkers at the foot of the bed, and she looked up and she saw an apparition at the foot of the bed. Now, my grandmother is not the type, she's not hyperbolic. She didn't make things up. She was very Catholic. She said it was Jesus. Okay, you know, but he was blessing her. and the brother couldn't see it, but she could. Now, she told this story my entire life. She would tell the story, and it was always the same way. That night, the house caught fire, and the floor in that room caved in. They got the kids out just in time. She, I think that's why she was so religious, because she believed that, Jesus had saved her and that kind of thing. But I wonder sometimes, I don't know too many other people that see apparitions or have circumstances like that. I wonder if some of this came from her. So even though it wasn't my experience, I think sometimes that may have been something, and that may be where it came from.
Yeah.
I'm the only one in my family that I can think of that has any of this. The only one,
The only one
as
that
far as I
talks
know.
about it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's just it, But you
Yeah,
would think I think if they did, though, they would say something to me, because I'm pretty open. I don't hide it, so I think
right.
they would talk to me potentially.
But they do say a lot of mediums are either generational or trauma based, or
Yeah,
near death experiences are the main
right.
reasons. But that's a beautiful story. The beautiful story. I've talked to many Catholics or mediums that have come out of Catholic families that whose parents didn't talk about it all, but definitely had abilities. But like we were
Yeah,
talking, they just didn't want to talk about it. They didn't want to talk about it. They didn't want
no,
to share it for sure. So
no. And she did share that story, but she
that's a
never
beautiful story.
labeled it. She never labeled it as
Right,
anything other than miraculous.
right.
So.
So, what do you got coming up? I know you're going to be in Florida, huh?
Yeah, I'm going to be in Naples, Light the Way Spiritualist Center in Naples, Florida. So I'm leaving tomorrow if the snow plays well with me. I'll get on a plane tomorrow. My plane is in San Juan, Puerto Rico. Let's hope it makes it back up. But
Oh,
I'll be in Naples. I'll be in Naples. I have a gallery with Reverend Michelle Love on Friday. I'm doing private readings on Saturday. We also have a grief workshop on Saturday that we're doing together
oh, I love that.
with a therapist, and then of course the service on Sunday. So I'll be there doing that. And then I've got a bunch of other little events. I've got one here in next town over from me in Bill Ricker. I'm in Connecticut. I'm in Peabody, Massachusetts, a few places around, and then I'm off to Colorado in June to do an event there. So that'll be fun. Never been to Colorado before, so
You'll
that should
love
be a
it.
good
That's
time.
beautiful. Real.
Yeah.
One of our viewers, Nick, said it's like 6 feet under come to life.
Yeah,
Did you
without all
watch
the without all the dysfunction. I like to think we're a little bit less dysfunctional than they were. Yeah, but it's so true.
that?
The
Was a
two
great show.
brothers and my mother at one time was my secretary too. So there you go.
Did you say it was just you
Crazy.
and your brother that specifically ran that business?
Yeah, yeah,
That's a
yeah.
lot.
It was a lot. I mean, we had some, I think I told you the other day, we had a lot of police officers and, you know, uh, correctional officers and firefighters, and that would come and work funerals and that kind of thing. But they didn't do the day to day. They show up on a funeral and that was it. So we did it. It was us all the time.
Yeah, well, one of my partners became a funeral director. Another one works for a funeral
Oh, wow.
company. So yeah,
No
there's a little
kidding.
bit of a correlate. Well, because it's like you said, they can accept that kind of work and understand it and
Yeah.
not take that all home with them. They understand all
Right.
that. So
Right. Right. Yeah. No, it's true. It's
for
true. And they
sure.
were professional. You know what I mean? They'd
Yeah,
help
yeah.
out with traffic and all these other things. It was just nice to have them.
So how did you get to be the Boston medium? Because I don't even hear a Boston accent out of you.
And I got to tell you, I don't think it was me that ever said that the first time. People started saying it. Oh, you're from Boston. You must be the Boston medium. I'm like, I don't think so, but whatever. But I said, okay, I'll stick with it. But I don't really use it that much myself. I think
I like it though.
people, it's the name. It's a thing. It's fine. It's a calling card, I guess. But I don't know. I try not to have that accent. I was in Texas a couple of years ago, just visiting, and I was in line somewhere and someone said, "Oh, you must like the Red Sox." And I said, "Why?" I went, "Oh, it's the accent. Thanks." But it's not like that Ted Kennedy Cape Cod accent. I don't have that.
No, not at all.
Southeastern Massachusetts is notorious for the accent.
gotcha.
There are no R's in the alphabet when you get down there. It's crazy.
Yeah, well, I was in Oklahoma 35 years, and they always still thought I was from New York. I mean, I didn't think I sounded that way, but they're like, "Oh, you're from New York." Yeah, I guess I am.
Well,
Guess
you
I
know,
am.
Michelle that I'm going to see, she's from Long
Yes.
Island,
Yes,
right?
she is. Yeah.
And it's so funny because I say, she's like the nicest person. I just love her to death. And I said, the first time I met you, you just said hi, and I thought you were going to beat me up because she's got that New York, Long Island, mafia
Right.
sounding accent to her. So
Oh, totally.
she's such a good person.
Well, can you show your book again for everybody and
Yes,
tell us where
this
it's
is it.
available? It's a beautiful
Yeah,
work.
yeah. And for people who know Joe Shield, he wrote the foreword to the book, which I just love. So he wrote the foreword, and the book is available right now on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and Balboa Press, which is a division of Hay House, but I don't think you can go to Hay House and get it. You have to go to Balboa Press bookstore and get it there if you wanted. But any of those three places, it's available.
Hmm.
And it is the story. It's the story.
Well, it's your story. That's what I
Yeah,
love. I love
yeah,
autobiographies to tell your story.
yeah.
I'm sure there's a lot of good stuff in there. So go out and check it out. Congratulations.
Thank
It's a
you.
big deal to have your book out. And your website again?
MediumScottAllan.com. And it's obviously there, Allan. Yeah,
Yes. Yeah,
MediumScottAllan.com.
two different ways to spell that for sure.
Yeah.
Well, Scott, I always like to end with this last question. What is one of the most important things you have learned through your spiritual journey?
That we are a lot more connected than we think we are. That at the end of the day, we're all in it together, and life is short, and we're here to learn something and to learn from each other. My pain might also be your lesson, and vice versa. So I think we just take care of each other, be kind to each other, and I think that's really it. I think sometimes we kind of get focused on ourselves, and that it's just us, and we're just struggling in this world, but this world is just a drop in the bucket over considering the infinity that we have together.
Well, you've
So
seen that through life experience for sure.
yeah, for sure, for sure.
So I so appreciate you being on tonight and talking
Thank you.
and having this conversation. I appreciate it very much. Thank you, Scott.
I appreciate you.
Of course. Um, I'll be back in 2 weeks here for Enlightening Your Way. For everything about Lilydale Assembly, check back here on their page often. There's a lot of stuff going on off season and during season. They've already listed all the things going on this summer, all the workshops. So check it out on this page. My Facebook page, Wellness with Nancy Lombardo, and Instagram, nancy.k.lombardo. My name is Nancy Lombardo. I am protecting and serving your well-being. Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us.
Right.